Hi, I'm Sun-Joo Kim, Harvard-Yenching Professor of Korean History. In the first segment of the five-part presentations on the Tae-ch'ing family documents preserved in the Harvard-Yenching Library, I gave an overview of the document and the Tae-ch'ing family settled in Puyo from the late 16th century. In this presentation, I will discuss the document called the Mutual Agreement on the Division of Property, one of the 8 고문서, dated 1699. Inheritance documents, together with adoption papers and household registers, are primary sources for the study of Joseon family and society. They inform us not only of an individual family's composition and character, but also of a larger social structure. Family wealth was mostly composed of land and slaves, and these documents enlighten us on land and slave ownership and on slavery itself. There are largely 3 types of inheritance documents called 별급, 허여, and 화회. 별급 was a special grant to a child during a parent's lifetime. Through 허여, parents bequeathed their assets to their children when alive. And through 화회, children divided parents' wealth after their death. Historians have produced a rich body of scholarship based on the many extant inheritance documents. One of the key findings is that equal inheritance among sons and daughters was the common practice in Joseon Korea until the late 17th century. This was a practice that reflected the commonly accepted idea that both the paternal and maternal lines were important in family succession. The clause on equal inheritance was included in the Code of Great Administration, 경복대전, a national code compiled in 1584 to legalize this popular practice at the time. Generations of equal inheritance, however, caused a serious financial problem for 양반 elites from around the late 17th century onward. The assets of elite families decreased over time as their lands became fragmented and scattered across many different locations. The solution was to discriminate against daughters and sons other than the eldest son. A good example comes from the Boan Kim family, whose 28 inheritance documents show that until the mid-17th century, the family practiced equal inheritance, and its ancestral rituals were taken care of by both sons and daughters. A drastic change took place beginning in the latter part of the 17th century. First, daughters were excluded from offering ancestral rituals and thus received a smaller share of the family's assets, while sons each received an equal share. By the late 18th century, however, the family's ancestral rituals had become the monopoly of the eldest son, who also received the lion's share of the family property. Equal inheritance and offering the ancestral rituals by sons and daughters, as well as the descendants of daughters, did not fit well with the Confucian principle of agnatic succession. However, it was not this Confucian ideal that had brought about these changes in inheritance practices. If it had been, we would expect the changes to have taken place before, in the early Joseon period, when many Neo-Confucian social norms were adopted and included. Rather, the Yangban elites introduced these changes in order to cope with their new reality, pauperization. And the Neo-Confucian principle of agnatic succession legalized or legitimized their action. Changing the inheritance pattern to primogeniture subsequently discouraged uxory-local marriage while promoting the development of same surname villages, the formation of lineage association, the establishment of exclusive family cemeteries for patrilineal members, the compilation and publication of patrilineal genealogy, and other commemorative writings to glorify ancestors. Let's look at the particular inheritance document, one of the Tae-ch'ing family documents. The first line marked with red box tells us when the document was drafted, on the 6th day of the 11th lunar month in the 38th year of Emperor Kanghi, or in Chinese Kangxi, which is equivalent to 1699. Below the date, it tells us that this document is a mutual agreement on the division of property among cousins. Though it says the division took place among cousins, we will soon find out that actually it did not. Followed by this heading is an introductory statement which provides explanation why such a document was drawn up. Any unusual reasons for an unequal division of family property are often mentioned in this part. Sometimes this introductory part inadvertently records trivial family matters and disclose intimate family details like the actions and emotions of interpersonal relationships and family ideals. This particular document informs us that the three original inheritors drafted an agreement in 1681 to divide the ancestral property of lands and slaves. However, they died before finalizing it. Therefore, the three men appearing in this document participated in writing up the final agreement based on the earlier draft agreement of 1681. The actual division of property had occurred 18 years earlier, and the inheritors must have managed their own shares ever since then. They therefore drew up the final agreement to ensure that they had a legally valid document to which by all interested parties had agreed and signed. The section ends with a note saying that the document should be used as a legal foundation if and when there are any conflicts over family assets later on. Indeed, there were numerous litigations concerning inheritance and property ownership during the Joseon dynasty, and inheritors utilized these documents as key pieces of evidence. The next paragraph shows that an ancestral ritual allowance, Sun-Joo, was set aside. In the early Joseon period, a ritual allowance was not usually reserved because both sons and daughters took their turns offering the ancestral worship. From about the mid-16th century on, however, a good number of inheritance documents specify a separate share as a ritual allowance. The ritual allowance was not necessarily under the care of the eldest son in the 16th century, but was also given to grandsons, daughters, sons, foster children, adopted sons, or sons and grandsons by concubines. The sole purpose of this ritual allowance was to maintain continuous rituals offered by any descendants, unlike the late Joseon preference for primary ritual heirs, either the eldest son or an adopted son, when there was no biological son offering rituals. In late Joseon, the size of the ritual allowance tended to become larger, and it became under the care of either the ritual heir of the elder or the elder of the lineage association. After reserving the ancestral ritual allowance, the document divides the rest of the family property among the three inheritors, Han Se-man, Yu Dam, and Han Gwen. Although the first line of the document states that the division was among cousins, they were not cousins as this genealogical tree shows. Han Gwen was Han Se-man's uncle. Gwen was a half-brother of Han Sung and the son of Han Sang-go by a concubine. Madame Han, Sung's sister and Se-man's aunt, married Kwon Yu-hyung. Yu-hyung's daughter, Madame Kwon, married Yu-dam, Yu Tae-ch'ing's grandson. In some inheritance documents, a husband represents his wife. That is why the document records Yu-dam as one of the inheritors. Madame Han and Kwon Yu-hyung had only one daughter, and Yu-hyung died early before his daughter married. After her marriage, Madame Kwon lived with and supported her mother, Madame Han. After her mother's death, Madame Kwon took proper care of her funeral and entombed both her mother and father in the same grave. In addition, she had her second son, Yu Myung-gil, be the ritual heir for her parents. Yu Myung-gil was the scribe in the document, as we can see soon in the document. As the son of a concubine, Han Gwen received much less than the other two inheritors, but more than the legally determined share. The Great Code of Administration defined the share of a child by a good status concubine as 1/7 the share of the primary child, and the share of a child by a base status concubine as 1/10 the share of the primary child. In terms of the number of slaves, Han Se-man and Yu Dam received 6 slaves each, while Han Gwen received 2, which is 1/3 the number of the others received, and thus more than a legal share. In terms of dry fields, Han Gwen again received a little more than 1/3 of what Han Se-man and Yu Dam received. Han Se-man's share and Yu Dam's share, however, are almost equal. Before the late 17th century, the equal inheritance rule was quite strict. Not only the size of the land, but the type, location, fertility, and other farming conditions were considered in the case of land, while gender, age, health, and talents determined shares of slaves. Therefore, the slightly different sizes of land shares and uneven numbers of slaves do not necessarily indicate an unequal division of property. At the end of the document, marked with a red box here, each inheritor's name as well as scribe's name is recorded, followed by their signatures. There was no official seal affixed on the document because inheritance papers were not usually certified by a county magistrate's office. An identical inheritance document was produced for each of the inheritors so that each had a copy. A couple of notes on the writing itself are in order. First, the character in green boxes, meaning end, is placed at the end of each person's share to prevent the alteration of the document by inserting more items in the blank space later on. Second, Idu, marked by red lines, was used in this type of document. Idu, or clerk's notation, borrows either the phonetic or semantic values of sinographs to express Korean grammatical particles and other parts of Korean writing. For example, the first single character ul in the first line here is an object marker. One more interesting aspect of this document is that it has some writing on the back of the document. It is official note on the manumission of Sang-hee and Yeonhee, Mason's two children, in 1729. Mason was Yu-dam's slave, and thus both Sang-hee and Yeonhee must have been Yu-dam's property as well. We do not know through what process and for what reasons they were freed from slave status. They must have had an official certificate that proved their manumission. The reason this document or agreement includes an official note on the back is to ensure the fact of manumission on the document, which otherwise could be used to prove their slave status. The note also enables us to confirm that the extant agreement was Yu-dam's copy. Although Yu-dam was a resident of Buyeol, the Cheongan magistrate signed the note, probably because the legal process of manumission took place in Cheongan County. In fact, the document shows that both the lands and the slaves divided in this agreement were located in several different counties in Chungcheong and Jeolla provinces. It was typical for a yangban's properties to be located and scattered in a number of different locations. We learned that this single-page document reveals a number of things about family, inheritance practice, ancestral rituals, land and slave ownership, and even local administration. In the next segment of my presentation, we will examine adoption papers.